Darrell, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this. First of all, it's 2 days after your season. How are you?
Tired.
Tired?
You're very tired.
It's been a long season. Season started back in August for you, or September. Just wraps up. Can you just describe what the season was overall?
You know what? I think this was a season of continuous growth, and we've kind of been on this pathway, I think, since I started, and we kind of looked at it as a process. And as we got from one season to the other, we want to continue to grow in certain areas, and I feel like our team is doing that. I feel like we're getting a little better every year. I think we're making progress in all the pieces that you need to make progress in a program in order for your program to develop. Mm-hmm. So I like where we're heading. So
I want to go back to the beginning.
Sure.
April 2017, you get the phone call that you're going to be the head coach of your former team, the UPEI Panthers. What was your initial reaction?
I think my initial reaction was excitement. I'd always wanted to coach at the youth sport level. That was a goal of mine, really, since I started coaching. And I never really thought it would be possible for it to happen here at my alma mater. I always thought it was going to happen closer to home, like in Ontario. And so when the call came in and I was offered the position, I was personally really excited about it.
Now, can you just tell me about the people around you? What was Corin like, your wife?
So Corin's response wasn't as enthusiastic as mine was, and the kids were a definite and hard no. They're not interested in it. So I have to go back. So we did do a preliminary. I did do a preliminary check-in when I decided to apply, and the kids were in favor of the move at that point. Mm-hmm. And I think once we got from the application process to the interview process, when it looked like, okay, this could be a real possibility, they flipped and said, "Dad, we don't want to move."
How did you convince them to move then?
Corin was the bigger goal, because I figured if I had her on my side, now I got a real ally to help convince the other two. Mm-hmm. So because Corin played here, went to school here, had friends here, was familiar with the area, I think she was a little bit more open to doing it. I also think there was a little bit of guilt, because I had a job offer back in 2010 at the University of Manitoba, and I turned that job down largely because Corin didn't want to go. And she had no connections to Manitoba, didn't want to live in Manitoba at that time. And so I think there was a little bit of guilt this time, because I'd gone to a number of interviews since that interview in 2010 and been very close but never have gotten it. I think she realized how much I really wanted to coach at this level. So I think this was close enough. There were enough things in our favor here that made it a little bit harder for her to say no.
Now, at the beginning of your time here, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. You've referenced countless times about the hard days. Yeah. Now, what does the hard days actually include?
Well, I think when I took over the program, so my first year I believe was 2017, 2018, I knew, largely because the athletic director and the community and alumni were telling me that it's going to be a tough year. Mm-hmm. I think we lost 5 starters and a rotation player from the year before I took over, and the team didn't make the playoffs that year. So we were largely left with the bench players who didn't have a lot of playing experience, and anybody I was able to recruit like in June after I had gotten the job. So we knew that first year was going to be a difficult one. I just wasn't really aware of how difficult it was going to be until I actually got in it. And there's problems A through Z. It's you're trying to shift culture. Not to say that the culture before was bad. It just wasn't my culture.
Yeah.
So the things that I believe in, the values that I share, you're trying to shift people who've been doing things a little differently for 2 or 3 years. And so buy-in wasn't what it needed to be. And in that initial year, like I had good guys, but they had old habits. And so that was really challenging.
How hard was it to transition from the ACAA or like the same conference to the AUS or U Sport in general?
So I was coaching in the OC2A in Ontario, which is part of the CCAA, and it was different because I was in Ontario, and most of my connections were in Ontario. Even the university programs that we played were all in Ontario. So I left the AUS in '94 and really hadn't had a lot of contact with what was happening in AUS basketball since that time. So coming back or moving back to Prince Edward Island and now coaching in the AUS did take some adjusting. It took some adjusting from, you get a feel for how coaches are coaching this style of play, and then you also have to take into consideration who you can recruit here, and that was something that took some time to learn as well.
Now, talking about recruits, one of your first recruits was Darrell Brooks.
Yes.
And how much has he meant to you during those hard days or the early days?
Well, the thing that I really appreciate with Darrell is the fact that, like, since day one, he's always been a very coachable kid. He's always been, or coachable young man. He's always been the type of player that when you speak to him, he looks you right in the eye. He's always asking questions about, to ensure he's doing it the way we want him to do it. And he's just been he's been a bought-in guy. And that's really important when you're trying to build a culture, because if everyone is pulling in the same direction, I think you're going to get results.
Talking about your first 3 seasons here, you went collectively 3-17, 6-14, 3-17. Obviously not the records that you wanted, but what did it teach you during those hardships?
I think each of those seasons taught me like different things. I think the first year I really realized, okay, you've got to get guys who are just completely bought in. But year one was really about learning. It was about learning about the league. It was learning about our campus. It was learning about our community. It was really learning. I was learning a lot, learning about systems, what systems would work at this level, what systems wouldn't work at this level. I think in the second year, I wanted to come back with a splash because we had done so poorly in the first year. And because I was trying to come back with a splash, we took some shortcuts in our recruiting and thought, okay, let's get some guys with some post-secondary experience and see if that can help us expedite this process. And I regretted that at the end of the second year, because I just felt like you can't shortcut the process, and wherever you try to, it's just going to come back and get you. And then in our third year, we went really young. So I kind of cleaned house at the end of our second year. We had a lot of guys still filtering from the previous kind of teams. And so we cleaned house that third year, and we decided to go really young. And again, we knew we were going to take our lumps, but at that point I was really convinced that we had to build a team from the ground up. And although we went 3-17 that year, we were in a lot of basketball games, really close games, and I just felt like the buy-in, the culture, everything was starting to feel right, and I thought we could build off that.
Talking about going young, you brought in 2 cornerstones that you found out to be cornerstones in Kamari Scott and Elijah Miller. Did you expect for them to come in or develop into the players that they eventually turned into for you, or like did you envision something else?
I knew Kamari a little bit, and I thought in time he could be what he is now. What's always in question with any player is really their work ethic, because it doesn't matter how talented they are if they don't have that drive and work ethic to get better. So that's always a question mark when you're recruiting players. But in terms of talent, I thought Kamari could blossom into a pretty good U Sport player. In regards to Elijah, I didn't know anything about Elijah other than what I had been told. And so when he came here, we kind of recruited him really loosely and said, hey, there's an opportunity here. There's no promises of anything. And he wanted an opportunity to come and help us grow. And like by the second week of September, I realized, wow, we got a serious player on our hands.
Now, COVID hit in 2020. So there was no season during the 2020-2021 season. Do you think that helped you with recruiting, finding players? Do you think that kind of hurt, considering no one was playing?
I think in our case, I almost hate to say this because COVID was devastating, but in our case here on campus, it was a huge advantage. We were able to get all the guys back on campus that year. We were able to train in the gym. We were able to train in the weight room. And I think having a young team come and train for an entire 8 months uninterrupted, not worrying about competition, not having to take breaks in training because you're worrying about, okay, we got 2 games this weekend. I thought that really launched our program to another level and probably expedited where we're at a year by a full calendar year.
And is that why you think into 2021, 2022, the start of the success for you started to come?
I think so, and if you look at the success, like we really didn't kind of come into our own until the second half of the season. So after January of last season is really when we started to kind of win consecutive games or win back-to-back games. And I really felt our team was we were just kind of coming together and gelling. So I thought, the whole year of not playing but training, and then having a half a year where we're actually now competing, and then going into the second half of that year, I thought we were really ready to make the jump. And I think that's why we were able to do as well as we did.
Going back to last year, you guys had a great year, and you even made it to the AUS final for the first time underneath yourself. What did you take away from that game that led you into this season?
Like from the game itself, I guess what I've taken away is like the discipline you have to have every single possession in order to be successful in that game. And it does take a little bit of experience. I think as a process, going from that game into this season, I think we realized as a group that we had to improve our off-season training. There were areas that were exposed in that game that we needed to improve on individually and collectively. And I think that's a huge part of why we started the season off as well as we did and had the season we had.
Yeah, talking about it, it was your most successful season to date, going 15-5, going back to the AUS final for the second year in a row, and making it to nationals and taking the first ranked team in the country down to the final possession. Can you just describe on what it meant to make it this far this season? I know there's still a lot of work to do, but
yeah,
what does it mean to make it to nationals and put this program back on that level again?
Well, it's kind of one of the main reasons why I took the job. One of the objectives or the goals we had was to try to get our program back to that point where we were, national contenders. That's the goal. And so it feels really good that we are, we can start to see, the work, the results of our work is every year we're starting to see us getting a little bit better. So this, I guess, is a really clear sign that we've made some significant gains in the work that we've done. And now the challenge is to get back there again.
So you guys are 0-2 in AUS finals. What do you think you have to do, I should say, to win the big game on a Sunday afternoon?
Well, I mean, it's funny, and I remember years ago listening to a coach, Lute Olson, who used to coach at Arizona, and I actually went to a clinic that he was coaching at, a Nike coaching clinic, and they introduced him as, because he had just won a national championship, and they listed off all of his accomplishments, all of his conference wins, all of his coach of the year, all that stuff. And then the final statement before he was actually introduced was, and he finally has won a national championship. He's won the big game. And so I now really understand that statement, because you have to win a lot of big games before you actually win the big games. So I think we're doing that. I think we're like we had a lot of milestones this year. We won at St. Yves for the first time. We won at Memorial for the first time, and we won both games. So we've accomplished some things that we haven't been able to do. We won at Dalhousie for the first time. So, those are big games, and those are milestones. And although they may not get you a banner, those are the things you have to do before you can win the banner.
So looking ahead to 2023, 2024, what is kind of the expectations that you have on yourself and a team, and where do you find this team to end up, or where do you see this team to end up?
So, I try never to get into the prediction game, because you don't know, injuries, whatever. But what my expectations are is that we just continue to get better in the areas that we're focusing on. I would expect that our guys are going to go have a great off season. They're going to come back significantly better than when they left campus. I know my expectation for myself and our coaching staff is that we're going to be prepared to have a program in place that gets our players better in all aspects of the game. And then we feel if we're doing all of those things, the winning and losing kind of takes care of itself. We certainly would not feel like we're moving forward if we weren't able to get back to that conference championship game. So obviously we want to be in that game again next year, and we want to win that game. That's, you know, but I've never started a season where I didn't want to win a national championship. Yeah. So I mean, that's always your ultimate goal, but then there are a bunch of things that you have to do leading into that to get you to that game, and we're still trying to get there. And
finally, your relationships are the most important thing I find as a coach. So over your last 6 years at UPEI, how have the relationships been, and how have they developed for you?
Well, I think, you know, when we're talking about players, I think the guys who have stayed here, we've certainly developed a really deep bond. I think because I'm still in the building process, we haven't necessarily been able to keep a large group of guys for 4 or 5 years. DeKellar's the first guy that I've kind of had for 5 years. And then the next wave of guys like Kamari and Elijah and Sam Chisholm, I've had those guys now for 3 years. So we're developing those guys. I've got a really tight relationship with, and it's been really cool watching them grow and develop both as an athlete and as men.
I appreciate this time, Coach, and I wish you nothing but the best of luck in 2023, 2024.
Thank you very much, Justin. I appreciate all that you've done for all of our programs this year on campus, so thank you for your hard work.